All right, welcome to the deep dive,
Yeah.
where you give us the sources and we
That's right.
take a deep dive into them and extract
Keep
the
going.
important stuff so you don't have to. Think of it as like Cliff's Notes for grown-ups or something
Yeah.
like that. So today's deep dive is all about Donald Trump.
Donald Trump. That's right.
Specifically, the excerpts you sent us from
Right?
the book. Donald Trump translates to Donald Trump, Birth and Childhood, specifically Chapter 1,
Yep.
Birth and Childhood.
That's right.
So we're going to stick to that, and we're going to figure out what's in there,
Absolutely.
what the authors are trying to tell us about Donald Trump and his early years.
I think that's a great idea. I think one of the things that this chapter does
Yeah.
is it lays the foundation for understanding who he becomes
Yeah.
later in life. And, you know, as they say, the child is father to the man.
So true. So let's start at the very beginning. His birth. June 14th, 1946, Jamaica Hospital Medical Center in Queens, New York.
So post-World War II, optimism in the United States.
Yeah.
You know, like a real sense of like hope and possibility and like we're going to, you know, the future's bright kind of thing.
Like a can-do attitude.
Yeah,
A
absolutely.
real can-do attitude,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, very much so. And the source really frames his arrival against this backdrop. You know, it talks about jubilant sounds of a nation celebrating its first peacetime summer. And then right after that, it says, and on this day, Donald John Trump was born.
Yeah.
You know? So it's almost like, you know, they're kind of like subtly positioning him as a part of this, you know, emerging era of American hope and possibility.
Yeah. It's like this new baby's born. This is the future.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Now, one thing the book does is it talks about him having, even as a newborn, a piercing gaze and powerful cry.
Oh.
And I'm not
good
sure what newborn has, what that really means. I don't know if you can really gauge that.
Yeah. I think, you know, when we read biographies, especially biographies that are trying to sort of illuminate the origins of significant figures, you know, we often see a kind of retrospective lens applied to even their earliest moments.
Right.
So it's like, were these really actual infant behaviors, or are they sort of being imbued with meaning later on?
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
to sort of fit this narrative of, you know, he was destined for greatness. Kind of.
Destiny. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's always interesting to kind of to think about those kinds of descriptions and whether they're truly reflective of, you know, the baby,
Yeah.
or more about the story that's being told about them.
Right.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And I do think, the way that the authors write this chapter, it does kind of set up this
For sure.
idea of destiny.
Yeah, absolutely.
So speaking of destinies, let's talk about his parents. So his father,
Right.
Fred Trump, he was a real estate guy, built a lot of middle-class housing in Brooklyn and Queens, but the book says he clawed his way up. He
Yes.
built his empire brick by brick. So this is a guy who works hard and gets stuff done.
Yeah, absolutely. There's this real sense of a kind of a self-made man, you know, a bootstraps kind of mentality. And the way they describe his work ethic as relentless, that really kind of speaks to that.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, he wasn't just a builder. He was also instilling this in Donald. The book talks about how Fred tell Donald, you are a killer, ... you are a king.
That's so interesting, that duality, right?
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, you've got killer, which suggests, ruthlessness, competition, and then king, which is this notion of like inherent superiority. And I think that's really fascinating to see, at such an early stage, because I think it kind of speaks to maybe the foundation of his later persona, which is very much, combative, but also very self-assured.
Yeah. Always believes he's right.
Yeah, exactly.
And the book also, it talks about Fred's business style as being, exacting, sometimes ruthless. And I think that's something that we see later in Donald's negotiation style.
Right.
His approach to business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's tempting to draw a really direct line there, right?
Yeah.
To say, oh, well, he learned that from his father. But I do think it's worth keeping in mind as we go on. We're going to see, things about the military academy and other influences that might also have, contributed to the way that he approaches competition and negotiation,
right,
and so on. So I think it's tempting to sort of overemphasize the parental influence, but I think we should also be open to other possibilities.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how that all develops. But we've talked about the dad. Now let's talk about his mom, Mary Ann MacLeod Trump. Now, she was an immigrant from the Isle of Lewis, Scotland, came to New York, and became a socialite. That's quite a journey.
It really is. And, the way the source describes her, it kind of provides this really interesting contrast to Fred,
Yeah.
because it talks about her bringing old world grace and resilience and, kind of planting the seeds of showmanship and social aspiration
Yeah. Yeah.
in Donald. So, while Fred's, sort of that more kind of outwardly aggressive figure,
Yeah.
she seems to be, more focused on presentation and social standing and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see those two kind of influences at play,
Yeah. And the source specifically says that Donald inherited her flair for the dramatic and eye for grandeur. So I think that really speaks volumes to who he is later in life. I mean, when you think about his career in media,
Absolutely.
in real estate development, building these huge buildings, this very performative aspect to it all.
Yeah, very much so.
I think there's something there.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's almost like he kind of takes those two influences, right? The kind of like the drive and the ambition from his father and this appreciation for image and social standing from his mother, and kind of blends them together to create his own unique style.
Yeah. Now let's talk about where he grew up, because that also plays a big part, right?
Yeah.
So Jamaica Estates, the book, describes this stately 23-room Tudor revival mansion with formal gardens. Not exactly. Roughing it right. Right.
So this tells us something about his upbringing, right?
Yeah, it really does. And, I think the contrast that the source draws between this opulent family home and the, modest dwellings Fred built and rented to working class families is really, really striking, right? Because it immediately highlights the level of success that Fred had achieved, right?
Yeah.
But it also underscores, the kind of privileged environment that Donald was raised in.
Right.
And I think it's worth, kind of thinking about, well, what kind of perspectives on wealth and privilege might have developed from that kind of juxtaposition, right?
Yeah. But the source also says that, it wasn't just all about the trappings of wealth. From the age of 7, Donald would go to construction sites with his dad. So he's out there seeing the family business in action. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that detail really underscores Fred's clear intention to kind of immerse his son in the world of the family business from a really young age.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Fred would tell him on those visits is, look at the foundations first, ... If the foundation is weak, the whole building will eventually collapse.
Right. A very tangible metaphor, isn't it?
It is. And I think, it's presented not just as a kind of a practical construction tip, but almost as a foundational principle for success in any endeavor. It's a tangible way of talking about having a solid base, having a strong underlying structure for whatever it is you're trying to build.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting, now we see this kid going to this very nice private school, Q4 school.
Yeah.
And there's this incident where he purportedly gets into it with his music teacher.
Oh, wow.
And things escalate. There's a physical altercation.
Yeah. Okay.
And the source presents this as kind of a defining moment, because it shows his struggle with criticism and this very competitive nature.
Yeah. I mean, one of the classmates from the school is quoted in the book, and they say he couldn't stand being told he wasn't the best. ... Even then, Donald lived in a world where second place wasn't an option.
It's interesting, right?
So it really underscores this deep-seated need to be seen as superior.
Yeah. And I think, the source says that this resulted in, quote, explosive temperament, declining academic performance, increasing behavioral issues. So clearly something's got to be done, right?
Yeah, it seems like, this is a pattern that needs to be addressed. And that leads to a pretty significant change in his environment.
Yeah. Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At age 13, he's sent to New York Military Academy. Wow. And the source really emphasizes that this was a direct response to these escalating issues. It says, the main reason for sending him there was to learn discipline.
And it's quite different, right? I mean, it's strict regimen, military precision, Spartan conditions.
Really like a complete 180 from his previous life.
And you kind of wonder what that must have been like, to go from this very, lavish upbringing to this, really strict environment.
But, what's interesting is that according to the source, Trump didn't just kind of endure this environment, but he actually thrived within it. He went from, this 10-year-old kid who's getting into fights with his music teacher to, eventually becoming the captain of the cadets in his senior year. So that suggests, it suggests a pretty remarkable capacity for adaptation, for leadership,
Yeah.
It's really quite something.
And it wasn't just, the discipline and the leadership.
Yeah.
The source says he also excelled at athletics. Baseball, football, basketball.
Oh, wow.
And they use that term again, competitive fury, which they, earlier had used to describe him as a child.
Right.
But now it seems like it's channeled into a more, structured environment.
Right, exactly.
And he's using it. He's learning how to use it.
Yeah. It's almost like the military academy is providing him with an outlet, right? For that kind of energy and drive.
Yeah.
And his mentor at the academy, Colonel Theodore Tobias, he says something really interesting. He says, "I've never seen a cadet with such natural leadership ability."
Wow. ...
That kind of charisma can't be taught. So, even within this very rigid structure of the military academy, his personality, his ability to lead others, it really comes through.
So even with all this discipline and structure, you still see the ambition there.
Okay.
The book talks about his dorm room decor, and it's not posters of rock stars or anything like that. It's pictures of Manhattan skyscrapers, architectural drawings, real estate articles. So this guy is focused.
Yeah, that's really interesting, right? Because it gives us this kind of vivid glimpse into his aspirations at this time, right?
Yeah.
While his peers are probably thinking about girls and cars and typical teenage stuff.
Right.
He's got his sights set on the world of high stakes real estate and those sorts of things. And the source describes him like gazing out at the New York City skyline at night and telling his roommate, "Someday I'm going to build the biggest, most beautiful buildings in that city. The Trump name will be on all of them." And they really highlight this as a kind of a declaration of intent, like this is where he's headed.
It's like he's already got it all mapped out in his head.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not just that he's got it mapped out, but he knows how to get people to follow him.
Right.
The book talks about how he could command attention, how he would organize events, lead drills, and it describes him as having a flair for the theatrical. So it's all about the performance too.
Yeah, I mean it's clear that he understands, even at this early stage, the power of presentation, right? The power of personality, of magnetism, and the source even includes this anecdote from one of his fellow cadets, who talks about how Donald could, make washing windows sound like the most exciting activity on earth, just through sheer force of personality.
So it's like he can sell anything.
Yeah, it's like he understands how to make things seem, more important, more significant than they actually are.
And he's comfortable talking to anybody, right?
Yeah. I mean, the source mentions how he could talk to the kitchen staff 1 minute, and then be chatting with wealthy parents the next. So it's like he understands how to move between different social circles.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that speaks to a certain adaptability, right? A kind of understanding of social dynamics, which is, undoubtedly going to serve him well in the business world.
So 1964, he graduates from the academy, and the source says he's transformed. He's gone from this unruly child to this disciplined young man with burning ambition.
Yeah. And, even that little detail about him carefully packing his skyscraper photos, it feels very symbolic, right? It's like he's taking this core dream with him.
Yeah. And the source kind of sums up the academy's impact by saying it bent him without breaking him.
Wow.
It channeled his energy without diminishing his spirit.
Yeah.
And I think that really speaks to that kind of push and pull, between...
Having structure, having discipline, but also, maintaining that individual drive.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, that kind of tension.
And the chapter ends by really emphasizing how important these years are.
Yeah.
They're saying that it reveals all these formative experiences, that it highlights these influences of privilege and discipline.
Right.
And it emphasizes the development of, quote, stunning complexity.
Wow.
And boundless confidence.
So it's like by the end of this chapter, you really feel like, okay, this is the origin story.
Yeah.
Right? This is what explains who he becomes later.
And the last lines of the chapter really, kind of seal the deal, right? They say the foundation had been laid.
Oh, yeah.
And the stage had been set.
So it's really inviting you, the reader, to sort of view these childhood moments as the sort of building blocks.
Yeah. Of who he is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The essential elements that will explain, his later achievements, his later characteristics, and so on.
So just to kind of recap here, in our deep dive into this chapter about Donald Trump's early life, we've seen, the influence of his dad, this really ambitious father,
right?
His very socially adept mother,
absolutely,
this kind of push and pull between his very privileged upbringing,
right, and
the discipline he learned at the military academy, and it seems like even from a young age, there's this very strong personality, this drive, this vision for success in the real estate world.
Yeah. And the way it's presented in the chapter is that these are all essential pieces to understanding his trajectory.
Yeah. So here's a question for you, the listener.
Yeah.
Thinking about all these influences that we've talked about today, the drive from the father, the social grace of the mother, the discipline and leadership of the military academy, and of course that really strong self-belief. How do you think these things shaped him later in life?
Sure.
How did these things, how did they affect the way he approached business, the way he approached politics? Right. All of that. What really resonates with you when you think about these early years and who Donald Trump is today? That's something for you to ponder. And we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
Sounds good.
I'll be here.
See ya.